Hi everyone, this is Milka Ormiston, and I'm joined today with Jack Gotthelf, who will be speaking about how to be and remain forever employable in today's unpredictable and volatile job market. As organizations look for ways to reduce costs and increase efficiency, what are the secrets that employees should know about when building their expertise and credentials? And what are the steps to scale them to secure a stream of income? All of this and more is in Jeff's new book, truly fresh off the press, Forever Employable: How to Stop Looking for Work and Let Your Next Job Find You. And we are very excited to have a chance to speak with Jeff about it today. Thank you for joining us, Jeff.
I'm thrilled to be here, Milka. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. So first I'll give some background information about our webinar, and then I'll introduce Jeff, who will get us started. There will be time for questions, so please click the Ask a Question button below the video to ask your questions throughout the webinar, and we'll have time for them at the end of the presentation. I've also included a link to Jeff's new book in the resources section of the page below the video. Please go ahead and check it out. Jeff helps organizations build better products, and he helps executives build the cultures that build better products. He is the author of award-winning books Lean UX and Sense and Respond. Starting off as a software designer, Jeff now works as a coach, consultant, and keynote speaker, helping companies bridge the gaps between business agility, digital transformation, product management, and human-centered design. Most recently, Jeff co-founded Sense and Respond Press, a publishing house for practical business books for busy executives. And I'll let Jeff take it away from here.
Excellent. Hey, folks. I hope you're having a good day already, and I'm really happy to be here. I'm going to tell you a story today that is based around my experience over the last 12 or so years building a career that in many ways feels like being forever employable. I'm going to share that story with you. And then we get to the end. I'm happy to take your questions about any of the stuff that I want that I covered. The interesting thing about this particular story is that I was not initially very comfortable sharing it or speaking about it. It's a personal story, and the books that I've written before I wrote a technical book, I wrote a business book, and none of that really covered any of the personal side of my life. But this story does actually cover that, because that's what really motivates us to get up, go to work, do things, is the personal side of our lives. And for me, the story starts on January 31st, 2008. That was my 35th birthday. And on the morning of my 35th birthday, I woke up in a cold sweat. I woke up in a bit of a panic, and I couldn't figure out why, because up until that point, things were pretty good on my 35th birthday. This is me. These were my kids on my 35th birthday. They're not that little anymore. They are teenagers now, which is fascinating and terrifying at the same time. I had a nice job in New York City. I was getting paid pretty well. I had a house in the suburbs, 2 cars. Everything was going well. And really up until that point, I had a pretty good run to get there too. I started off as a broke musician. I toured in bands for a long time. I played keyboards in bands and didn't make any money, and had a lot of fun doing that. But when I got tired of being broke, I got very lucky because the internet came around. This is the mid to late 90s, right? And the internet provided a lot of job opportunities. And it turned out that back in 1999, if you could spell HTML, the markup language for the web, you could get a job. And I could spell HTML, and I ended up getting a job. I got a job at a company called IXL. IXL was one of the big .com 1.0, the first .com boom, consulting companies. And that was a tremendous opportunity to learn new skills on the job. Nobody really knew what they were doing at the time anyway. And so we learned a lot on the road, in the process of doing the work. In the process of doing the work, I started off at IXL doing web design and web development. And it turns out that there were other things that you could do on the web. I was presented with a very interesting book. This book is called Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And again, this was a new book in 1999 or 2000 Today it's in its fourth edition. And that book changed my life. That book told me that there were other things that I could do with my skill sets that would have more impact on these digital products and services that I was building. And it set me off down a path following a career in interaction design, user experience design, product management, and so forth. And so I've got this new career. I've got this new direction. I'm motivated by this book. Really changed my life. And the dot-com bubble bursts, right? All of a sudden it becomes very difficult to find a job. I bounce around for a while from place to place to place. I end up working at AOL in Northern Virginia for a few years, working on the software that went on these CDs. So if you received these CDs back in the 90s and the 2000s, I had a small role to play in that, and you're welcome for that as well. I ended up on the West Coast in Portland, Oregon, working for a company called WebTrends. And then finally, I found myself back in New York City, right around the time I turned 35, managing a design team at a company called The Ladders in New York City. And so in about the span of 10 years, which I just covered there in about 2 minutes, I'd clawed my way up to the middle, right? I was a middle manager. I had a small team, told a decent salary. I had a house, 2 cars, family. Everything was going great. And I wake up on the morning of my 35th birthday in a cold sweat. And what I realize, the cause for that is that in 5 years from when I was 35, in 5 years, when I turned 40, I was terrified of the fact that I was going to be old, which is funny saying it from this side of 40, but nevertheless, from 35, I was terrified that I was going to be old, too expensive, and unemployable. Because what I was seeing all of these younger, better, hungrier, faster designers, in this case, coming into the field. And I realized I wasn't going to be able to compete with them because they were better than me. They were hungrier than me. And most important, they were cheaper than me. And as you go up the career ladder, there's less and less jobs. Your salary demands expand and your skill sets atrophy. And there's no way I was going to compete with these folks. And so on that fateful morning, January 31st, 2008, I made a very specific resolution to myself on that morning. And I said this, I said, look, I'm no longer going to look for jobs. If I have to compete every time that I need to find a new job, whether I want to or I'm forced to based on a reorganization or an acquisition or a layoff or a crisis or something along those lines, if I'm forced to compete every single one of these times, eventually I'm going to lose. And so instead of me looking for jobs were going to look for me. That was the resolution I made for myself that morning. And I recognized that, wow, that's a fascinating and perhaps a mind-blowing statement to say, right? But the reality is it brings up some very, very tough questions right away, which I'm sure you're asking yourself as well, right? Great, Jeff, jobs are going to find you. But there are some key questions to answer when you make that kind of resolution. And here's the first one that I started to deal with immediately. Does anyone know who I am, right? So if jobs are going to find me, people need to know who I am. Do they know me, right? That's a question. And in 2008, I would argue that they probably did not know me. Why would they look for me? What problem do I help them solve? What's my core value that I deliver? What is it that I do that would make them come looking for me? What do people need help with that I can help solve? That was a big question for me. I'd done some fairly good design work over the first 10 years of my career, but why would people come look for me? Really good question. How would they find me? So let's say they know who I am, they know what I do. How would they find me? Do I have a website? Do I have a presence? Do I have a LinkedIn profile? It's 2008, so we've got all these things, right? Everything exists. And then ultimately, how do I attract the work that I want? In other words, I don't want just any jobs or any opportunities coming my way. I want work that I can do, want to do, challenges me, interests me, right? The kind of work that I want to do. And these were 4 very, very big questions that I began to look at quickly. And what I've done since the morning of my 35th birthday is I've spent the last 10 plus years, at this point it's 12 years, building my platform by answering those questions, answering those 4 questions on an ongoing basis. And what I've discovered in that time is that there are at least 5 qualities that I've seen in myself that helped me become forever employable, build my platform, build this reality where jobs and opportunities find me rather than me finding them. And that there were 5 specific steps that I took to get there. And when you add those things up, they come down to this. And this is a thing that really dawned on me as I was starting to write this book, is that you really have to treat your career and your professional development as a product. In the same way that you treat the thing that you do, or the service that you build, the product that you make, the value that you deliver at work, whatever it is that you do, you have to treat your career and your professional development the same way. You have to think about what problems you're going to solve for people, how you're going to solve them, what to charge for it, how to market it, how to improve it, how to optimize it, and how to keep it relevant over time. And that's something that a lot of folks don't realize. They just sort of, many folks just sort of kind of move through their career, applying for the next position that's got a slightly better title, a little bit more money, a little bit more responsibility, instead of really thinking about how to continuously optimize and improve your career and your professional development as you would a product or a service. And so the 5 qualities to becoming forever employable that I discovered in myself were these 5 qualities: entrepreneurialism, self-confidence, continuous learning, improvement, and reinvention. And for those of you who do work in technology or have heard of things like agile or agile software development, these terms should sound familiar to you, because these are some of the core ideas behind increasing the agility of organizations, the way that they react to the market. But we're going to apply those to ourselves. Now, what I've learned over the years is that I actually have all of these qualities, even though I didn't think that I did. And I want to show you how I discovered these qualities in myself. And I would challenge you to ask yourself, what have you done in your life that demonstrates each one of these qualities? So for example, entrepreneurialism. This is the one I think that gets people a lot. People don't maybe think of, a lot of folks don't think of themselves as entrepreneurs. I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur, or at least I didn't. Right? I was never the ideas guy. I was always the execution guy. But the reality is that I have done entrepreneurial things. I played in bands for a long time, and I managed those bands. Bands are startups. They're entrepreneurial ventures. You have a crazy idea. You get your friends together. You pour everything you have into this idea, and then you try to convince the world to buy your product, to scale it, to grow it to a thing where it becomes a sustainable and viable business. I had done this, and we had done this together as in the bands that I was in. So I did have entrepreneurial experience to help me think about how to apply that to my career and improving my professional development. Self-confidence is really interesting. A lot of folks feel like they lack self-confidence, and certainly imposter syndrome is a very real thing. As I think about the things in my life that I've done to help me build self-confidence, certainly being on stage and bands has helped, because you're really kind of putting yourself out there, you're putting your ideas out there. But there are situations that I've been in my life that have helped me build the confidence to overcome any difficult situation, which you can then channel into creating this forever employable platform for your career. And one of the things that I did to help me build self-confidence, at the time I didn't realize I was going to do this, was I worked in the circus. I joined the circus immediately after graduating from college. I graduated on a Saturday, and on Sunday, on Sunday I put my stuff in storage, and on Monday I was in the circus. And I lived in that truck on the left there, the one that has the circus word on it, with 7 other circus workers for 6 months, touring up and down the East Coast of the United States. It was a fairly miserable time. It was a fairly miserable situation, but I learned a ton about myself. I learned a ton about overcoming adversity, building a network, making friends, learning how to fit in a strange world. And it really helped me build my self-confidence. And I draw on that every day to help drive this platform creation for myself, this thought leadership, this recognized expertise. The next quality that I think is extremely valuable to becoming forever employable is continuous learning, reading, speaking with others, engaging in your community, using anything that comes your way to improve how you do your work, how you build your expertise, how you increase your experience. And these are the things that I've come across my entire life. I shared with you earlier this book here, Information Architecture for the World Wide Web. And I'm sharing it again because, again, I learned a ton from this book. And I ended up reaching out to the authors of this book. I count one of them, Lou Rosenfeld, as a friend. The other one, Peter Morville, I've met multiple times as well. And I've told them that this has changed my life. And by continuing to engage in the community and to read and to speak with others and to discuss ideas, I'm continuously learning. So I've always got new things to share on my platform. It's interesting because the learnings that you pick up inevitably will drive the improvement of the way that you do your work and your expertise and your experience. And this is something that we should be striving to do on an ongoing basis. There's a phrase that I love when as you start to think about improving your stuff. It's a phrase I learned in a TED Talk, which sounds really cliche, I know, but it's a TED Talk by a guy named Astro Teller who runs the innovation lab at Google. And this phrase is enthusiastic skepticism. And really, that's how I think about my professional development. I think about it with enthusiastic skepticism. I'm enthusiastic about always being able to do something better, right? I do something pretty well. How can I do it even better? And I'm excited to figure that out. Now, the way that I do that in my life, I do a lot of teaching and a lot of training. And one of the ways that I get better is I teach with others. I collaborate with other instructors in my industry and my domain, and we teach together. The photo that you see here on the screen is the last public class I taught before quarantine, and that was with a colleague of mine named Jeff Patton. Now, Jeff and I teach very similar ideas, but we come at it from two different sides. And when we teach together, we learn from each other. I certainly learn a ton from him, and we get better at teaching. So I'm continuously improving the work that I do. And then the last quality here is reinvention. And this is one of the most important ones because the pace of change in any industry in the world is increasing. And what got you here, what got you this level of success is not going to get you to the next level of success. And what we have to continuously do is think about how we take that core value, the problem that we solve, the answer to that question, why would people look for me? And apply it in new and compelling ways. So for example, one of the things that I work a lot with product teams, digital service teams in organizations that build digital products and services. And we talk about how to make those products great. There are several departments inside companies that I don't typically work with that don't think about their services in this same way of product thinking and design thinking. For example, human resources, right? HR, generally speaking, is aware of these concepts, but normally doesn't apply these concepts to the way that they work. One of the things that I've been trying to do lately is to bring product thinking, design thinking, and agility to non-product teams, to human resources, to finance, to legal, et cetera. And I wrote about this on HBR. So this is an article I recently published on HBR.org. And this is me attempting to reinvent what I've done in technology and bringing it to another part of the organization where I haven't had that much conversation, right? So those are the 5 qualities of being that I discovered in myself that helped me build this platform of thought leadership and recognized expertise, and that helped me become forever employable. Now, the qualities are nothing without the actual steps, right? Without the actual actions to move this forward. And there were 5 specific steps that I took to becoming forever employable. And they were these 5 steps: plant a flag, tell your story, follow the new path, teach, and then give it all away. And I want to go through each one of these and explain to you what I did at each one of these steps. And then I'll wrap it up and we can do Q&A about any questions that you have about this. So let's start with planting a flag. Now look, planting a flag means that you're going to make a decision about what slice of your experience or your expertise or what piece of your domain or your industry you're going to own, right? Where are you going to kind of plant a flag and say, I'm the person who knows the most about this, or I help people in this area or this domain solve this problem. And the goal is ultimately to become synonymous with that flag that you planted, to become the default go-to person for that challenge, that idea, that domain expertise. And the people who have done this well are synonymous with that. And I've got a couple of examples here that you may or may not be familiar with. So there's a guy named Eric Ries. Now, Eric Ries was a startup founder and technologist who ended up writing a bestseller, right? He planted his flag on a concept called the lean startup. And Eric Ries is the lean startup guy. He sold 1 million copies of this book. Jake Knapp, a friend of mine, a designer, super smart guy, planted his flag on this concept of sprints, design sprints specifically. Every single organization that I work with today is doing design sprints. And the guy they know that is the design sprint guy, that's Jake Knapp, right? That's where he planted his flag, and he owns that. There's a gentleman in Switzerland named Alex Osterwalder. He planted his flag on the concept of business model generation and the business model canvas. Most organizations today use many of Alex's tools to think and rethink and reinvent how they do innovation in-house. And Alex is synonymous with this concept as well. This is where he planted his flag. For me, I planted my flag with the challenge that I was facing at my job in 2008, 2009, 2010, which was marrying agile software development methodologies, which were becoming very popular, with good digital product design and development, good user experience design, two things that are very difficult to merge together and caused a lot of problems for me, as you can see in this chart that my team made for me one day in 2009. And it's a struggle that I was facing with my team. And in solving it, this is where I became the expert. This is where I planted my flag. And I became the lean UX guy, right? That's me. And you can kind of still see it. It hangs over my head. It's the first book that I wrote up here over my head. Now, you may ask yourself, you say, Jeff, okay, great. That's great. How do I figure out where to plant my flag? And that's a good question. There's lots of ways to think about this. But generally speaking, you want to look for the intersection of at least these three things. The three things that I'm talking about are your passions and your expertise. So what is it that you know? What are you an expert in? What do you have experience in, right? What do you say is your strong suit? I wouldn't limit it to professional things only. Add in the personal passions that you have as well. For example, when I set out to plant a flag, I thought about all of my professional experience, but I also thought about my personal passions as well. As you saw before, I played in bands, I played keyboards. I happen to know a ridiculous and perhaps unnecessary amount of information about vintage electric pianos. I had a collection of vintage electric pianos at my last house. My wife was not particularly thrilled with me for keeping so many vintage electric pianos in the house. But nevertheless, that's a passion of mine. And I have domain expertise there. I considered that as one place where I might want to plant my flag and create a platform, a content platform around that to drive inbound leads. Trends and current events. What's happening in the world today, right? What are the technological trends? What are consumption trends? Where do people get their information? Where do they watch videos? Where do they listen to news? How do they consume? What tools do they use? What devices do they use? Socio-political trends, geopolitical trends, cultural trends, right? What's happening in the world today that might impact how you deliver your expertise? And then ultimately, think about your target audience. Who do you want to target? Who do you want to influence? Who do you want to provide information to? And how big is that audience? Now, the intersection of all three things start to reveal options for where to plant your flag. And you'll likely generate more than one option there. So the question becomes, well, what do I do if I have more than one flag option? I may have multiple flag options. One of the things that you can do is start to think about this like you would think any new product or service or feature that you might develop for your business, for your company, for your clients, or whatever it is. Ask yourself the question, I've got this flag opportunity, right? This content for these folks delivered in this particular way. What's the biggest risk around that? And how can I test that? So for example, risks could be things like I'm targeting the wrong audience, or the audience isn't big enough, or the thing that I'm saying won't resonate with this audience. And the tests, the lightweight tests that you can run that don't require a lot of effort or a lot of cost could be things like you can start tweeting about this topic and seeing who responds. You can put up a post on LinkedIn and see what kind of feedback you get. You could point your iPhone at yourself for 3 minutes, record a video of you sharing something that you know about your domain expertise, and put it up on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever, and see what kind of response that you get. And if you start to get traction to those types of experiments, you can increase the level of investment that you make in those ideas. You start to make more videos, longer videos, better production. Maybe you invest in good lighting or a good microphone. But we don't want to do any of that until we start to see some traction. And that traction is the change in behavior in your target audience. They're listening to you. They're sharing your work. They're telling their friends. They're commenting. They're engaging you in a discussion about this. And that's how you start to de-risk some of these flag options. So that's number one, plant your flag. Number two, tell your story. Tell your story to anyone, everywhere, all the time. The goal is for you to become an expert in storytelling. And as you start to do that, one of the biggest challenges that people have is, well, what unique story do I have, right? We get into our own heads and we let doubt take over. Everyone has good experience. She has more to offer than I do. My story isn't extraordinary enough to be unique. But here's the thing. The best part of your experience, of your story, is not whether or not you've run an ultra marathon or built a massive company or worked with celebrities. The best part of your experience is that nobody else has it. Only you took the steps that got you from where you are to where you've been to where you are today. Only you can tell a story that nobody else can. It may feel like everything's already been said on the internet about your topic or your domain or your expertise. And it's probably true. Almost everything has been said. The one specific thing that has definitely not been said is your story, right? You're the only person to have gone through everything you have in the ways and in the times that you have. Only you have that perspective. You can start to share that. And it's amazing how well that starts to resonate authentically with people because you lived it, right? And so for me, I started telling my story in 2010. Now, remember, this is 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. I started giving presentations about how we integrated agile software development and user experience design at conferences. I submitted myself to conferences and I got accepted and I started giving talks. August 2010 was the first time I gave a talk about this, 2.5 years after my 35th birthday. A month later in Paris, I gave the first Lean UX talk. The first thing kind of where I really planted my flag. That was the first time I spoke about it publicly on stage. And I kept telling that story and it started to develop new opportunities for me to tell my story. And on March 7th, 2011, I got what I consider my big break. I wrote an article for an online magazine called Smashing Magazine. Smashing Magazine caters to web designers, primarily and front-end developers. In 2011, 3 years after my 35th birthday, I published this article. This first kind of big public article. Smashing Magazine at the time had 1 million readers in 2011. So all of a sudden, this conversation goes global and starts to present me with more opportunities to tell my story. I get to kind of go to conferences, I get to give speeches, and really anywhere and everywhere that people wanted to hear my story about how we were fixing this particular process problem for digital design and software development. Anywhere and everywhere that I could tell the story, I did. I talked about it on Medium and on Quora and on LinkedIn and on Facebook, and I tweet about it, and I have an email newsletter talking about this concept of Lean UX. And honestly, the only thing we stopped short of was Lean UX the musical. I would have written it, I would have done it, combining my passion for music and work, but it just seemed a bit ridiculous. So we didn't do that, right? But the question becomes, why? Why did this story resonate, right? At this time, this story that I was telling, why did my story resonate? And in hindsight, there's a handful of things that I've discovered that I believe made my story resonate. And as you start thinking about telling your story, think about how you can apply these concepts to your story. So first of all, I'm solving a real problem that many people had, right? So the thing that I'm talking about, a lot of people care about, or a lot of people experience. So there's an audience for this and they're sympathetic to the cause. I had actual real world experience. I wasn't an academic, not that there's anything wrong with that. I wasn't a consultant back then, not that there's anything wrong with that, but I was doing the actual work on a day-to-day basis. And I was sharing that work humbly with the world. I was writing blog posts and speaking on stages. I was sharing the things that worked, but I was also sharing the things that didn't work. And I think that that was really compelling for a lot of folks because they saw that we weren't perfect. Not everything that we were doing was a success. And when it failed pretty badly, but we learned from it and we moved forward, which meant that every single time that I spoke at a conference or wrote a blog post or an article or told my story, I was providing practical, tactical advice for my readers. And what this does is it builds that authentic connection. It gets people to pay attention to you. You've got your story, your perspective, delivered with humility and providing value. That builds that connection. Plant your flag, tell your story. Step 3, follow the new path. What's super interesting is that as you start to tell your story and as your message amplifies, new opportunities begin to emerge. This is, you're building that platform of recognized expertise, you're building that platform of thought leadership, and you're starting to attract these new opportunities to yourself. Now, the interesting thing here is, what are you going to do with those opportunities? As I was telling this story, as I was starting to get invited to speak at conferences and to teach a few classes, I was doing less and less actual design work. Now, if you recall, on the morning of my 35th birthday, I was already terrified that my design skills weren't as good as designers coming into the field immediately. And now, not only are my skills not as good as other designers, I'm actually doing less design work. Because what I'm actually doing is I'm flying around the world and giving talks and teaching classes and teaching workshops and talking about this idea of lean UX. Now, I'm worried about that, but what happens is new paths emerge, new opportunities emerge. They get pulled into your orbit because you're creating this platform of expertise. It turns out that book publishers go to conferences. I didn't know this. And they look for who is speaking on the latest topics. And they basically offer you book deals. And so I was the person who was speaking frequently on the topic of lean UX. It was an up and coming idea. Lots of people were interested in it. And I got offered a book deal after speaking at a few of these conferences. And I said, look, this is a new opportunity for me. It's going to mean less design work, but I'm going to jump forward and I'm going to take this opportunity. I'm going to embrace this new opportunity that I've pulled in, and I'm going to do it. Except there was one big problem that I didn't tell the book publisher when I signed the contract to write the book. I didn't know how to write a book. I'd never done it, right? 500 words I could write. 750 words, I could write that too. 50,000 words, that's like climbing Mount Everest. No way I could do it, right? I didn't know how to do it, but I decided that I was going to figure it out. Now, a lot of folks will say, well, listen, that's luck. You were so lucky to get that book deal. And it's true. I was lucky. But when that opportunity presented itself to me, I was prepared to take it. And I think that that is also the definition of luck, as you can see on screen over here, right? The idea that you're lucky, yes. But when luck strikes, what are you going to do with it? Well, for me, I got lucky. I got offered a book deal. Don't know how to write a book. I'll figure it out, right? So I signed the contract and I set off to write the book, and it was a disaster. It was really, it was brutal. It took me 2 years. It was a brutal slog. And remember, I don't have to do any primary research for this book. I have just to write what I know from my experience. Still, it takes me 2 years because I don't know how to write a book. I burned through 3 editors and I wrote the manuscript 4 times to finish Lean UX, my first book. It was a brutal, brutal process. But I learned along the way. I got better. And then finally, 5 years after my 35th birthday, I'm now 40 years old, right? I'm old. Lean UX, my first book, launches. Right? It took me 5 years to get here. I want to be clear about the timelines here because this is not overnight. This is consistent, persistent effort in a specific direction to achieve this platform of expertise so that new opportunities find me. And sure enough, after the book goes live, tons and tons and tons of new opportunities started to find me. The book has been successful. It's been out for 7 years. It's in its second edition now. And in fact, sitting in my inbox right now is the contract for the third edition of this book. It continues to be a relevant topic. And so it continues to present itself as yet another opportunity to seize. So plant your flag, tell your story, follow the new path, because you never know what else is going to pull in. Step 4 is fascinating to me, because if you would have asked me 20 years ago when I started working professionally, if I wanted to be a teacher when I grew up, I would have laughed. No way I want to be a teacher. I don't think I'd be good at it. I don't think it's for me. Interestingly enough, it's what I do. I teach, and the teaching is how I get better at the storytelling. It's how I get better at the content. And so I started teaching Lean UX initially. I teach more than that now, but I said yes to everything. Workshops and conferences and webinars and podcasts and guest articles and interviews and whatever it is. Every one of those opportunities is a teaching opportunity. What I'm doing right now, I'm teaching. It's a teaching opportunity. When I teach, I get feedback on my material. I see how it resonates. I learn how to improve my storytelling. I understand where it's not resonating. I understand where the content could use some updating, where there are opportunities to become more relevant. And I get better at the subject matter the more that I teach it. And so there's a tremendous opportunity for you, once you've planted your flag and started telling your story, to begin to teach. And you can do this publicly, or you can do this in-house as well. If you work in-house, there's no shortage of opportunities for you to teach in-house, and you become invaluable to your organization. You can become the person who leads trainings. You can become the person who gives keynotes at the internal conferences, or writing for the corporate blog or podcast. There's tremendous opportunity for you to do the teachings inside your organization as well. And as you do that, you're building your platform, you're building your value for the organization, and perhaps even beyond the organization as well. Now, the fifth and final step. So we've talked about planting your flag, telling your story, following the new path, and teaching. The fifth and final step is giving it all away. This is the thing that I've learned most recently. It took me a long time to get here. And I really struggled with this for a long time, because I work hard to build my experience and my expertise. I worked hard to create this content to solve these problems. And if I'm going to share that with somebody, shouldn't I get paid for that? And the answer is, of course you should. But the way that happens, and it's unintuitive, is you give it all away at first. The more that you give away, the more that you share back with your community, with your industry, with your domain, with your organization, the more comes back to you. And that's been something that I've learned time and time again over the last few years. And it took me a long time to get here. To do that, you've got to make your work and yourself easily findable and accessible. How will people find me? Remember that question? Post your materials online, articles, webinars, podcasts, blog posts. Make it super easy for people to find you, and encourage them to find you and to look for you and to find this free content. All of my stuff lives at jeffgodhealth.com. Everything is there. My blog posts, my articles, my webinars, my podcasts, etc. It's videos. It's all there, right? There are high quality videos of me giving keynotes at big conferences. You could take that video, put it on a screen in a conference room, gather the team, and watch that video for free, right? And still, companies hire me to come in and give those same talks that they can just play off the video, right? The more you give back, the more that comes back to you. You can do that locally as well. You don't have to do it on a global scale, right? You can build your community locally, start locally, and then grow by giving back, right? Speak at meetups. Meetups are starving for content. If they've got to put on a program every month, they're starving for content. You have an opportunity there. Local conferences. Are there local businesses where you can take your expertise and offer them a free talk to get better at storytelling, to practice, to see how it works, right? Hey, I'm going to take, can I do a lunch and learn for free to your organization about the thing that I know a lot about, right? Most organizations would welcome that, right? You're helping their employees, and you're building your community. You're telling your story, you're building goodwill, you're practicing, and that stuff comes back to you over time, guaranteed to do it. So give it all away is absolutely important. Now, as I wrap this up, a few things to remember that are key to becoming forever employable, building this platform, and having jobs and opportunities find you. You have to stay relevant. Staying relevant means you have to stay active. Staying active means that you stay present in the conversations that are happening around your domain, your expertise, wherever they're happening. If they're happening at the office, that's great. If they're happening on LinkedIn, that's great. If they're happening at conferences or events, that's where you need to be. You need to contribute to the conversation. You need to comment and discuss and challenge and post your own ideas. Participate in a way that keeps you top of mind when people think about where you planted your flag. I've got a problem with this. I'm definitely going to her for that because I know that she's the person who knows the most about that. Start the next thing at least 2 years before you'll need a new topic. So I told you about this kind of transition into bringing agility and product thinking and design thinking to human resources. I started that process 18 months ago. Why? Because I think it's important. I think it's relevant, and I have no credentials in HR. I don't. I've never worked in HR. And so I needed to build up my credibility in that space, to learn about that space, to engage in discussion, to get a sense of what they talk about, what they care about, and then contribute to that conversation in a way that then allows me to add in my 2 cents and hopefully grow a bit of a discussion there around what I believe is important. Now, I started that 18 months ago, knowing full well that it would take me 2 years before any kind of inbound invitations would show up, right? Persistent, consistent presence in that space allows you to move to the next thing. So give yourself time to transition from one thing to the next. Look, this is just one path. It's my path. It worked for me. There's no guarantee it's going to work for you, but you can pick and choose the pieces that you think might work and try them out and see how they work and grow them from there. And as you consider where to plant your flag, where to build your platform, and how to start becoming forever employable, I always think about this Bezos quote because for me, it's really important and really makes me think about how to stay forever employable, continuously employable. Bezos always gets asked, hey, what's going to change in the next 5 years, right? He's an innovator. What's going to change in the next 5 years? And he always responds, he says, look, that's not how I think about my business. I think about what won't change in the next 10 to 20 years. What will people always need? What needs will always be there? And I focus on those things. And I innovate around new ways to deliver those things, right? The technology will change, the conversation will change, but the basic needs will always be there. So how do you take your core value and continuously improve it for things that will always be there, the needs that people will always have? And that's a really good way to kind of think about this and frame this entire conversation. And so with that, I want to say thank you for having me, first of all, and thank you for listening. I hope this was valuable. I hope you learned a ton from it. A couple of really quick links for you to consider. First of all, if you want the slides that I showed you today, jeffgothelf.com/slides. I'm happy to send them to you. Just go there. The book is live. It exists. It's here. It's a relatively thin book. You can knock it out in a couple of days, maybe even a day. You can get it at Amazon.com. And if you're interested in just more detail on it, just go to foreveremployable.com and you'll get all the information that you need there as well. And so with that, I'd love to know what questions you have for me, and I'd love to answer them as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Jeff, for this incredible story and the roadmap that you shared with us. We do have great questions that came in. And for listeners, please continue to submit your questions. We will get to as many as we can. And I'm going to start with this one because I think it's quite relevant for introverts. I mean, how do you think that introverts can execute these strategies well? Do you think they need to change their behavior, or how can they stand out?
Great question. Great, really great question. So I learned recently, and I could be wrong about this, but I used to have a misconception about an introvert and an extrovert. I always thought that introverts were people who here's what I learned. Forget what I used to think. Here's what I think is correct now. Introverts get drained by being in public, generally speaking, and extroverts get excited by that, right? That's roughly the difference. And so I think ultimately I'm an introvert to some extent, right? I think there's a scale there, and I think I'm an introvert. I definitely get burned out after a while of being in these public places. I have to tell you that being on stage in front of 1,000 people is one of the loneliest places to be. I mean, you never feel more alone than on stage in front of 1,000 people. There's really nobody else there but you for introverts. So I don't know if that's an issue, but look, the reality is this: you need to find the channels that work for you. So there are lots and lots of channels for you to share your expertise and your experience. So getting up on stage in front of 1,000 people. By the way, just another quick aside. Getting up in front of 1,000 people, in my opinion, in my experience, is infinitely easier than getting up in front of 10 people. But 10 people, you can see every person, every reaction, every person texting under the table, right? With 1,000 people, you don't see anybody. It's kind of just a wall of faces. But look, if getting up on stage and talking in front of people isn't your thing, then don't do it. But maybe writing is your thing. Maybe recording videos is your thing. Maybe doing a podcast or some audio recording is your thing. Maybe visualizations are your thing, right? You've got to figure out your preferred channel for communicating your expertise, and then use that to get your ideas out there in a way that meshes with your personality and with your mental health needs, right? So, like for me, like I said, I can go to a conference, I can get on stage, I can do it, I can talk to a few folks afterwards, and then I run to my hotel room. I got to recharge for a couple of hours before I get back out into the scene there, right? So really finding the channel that works for you, and then using that channel to get your ideas out there. Maybe it's just Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, right? There's an infinite number of ways for you to deliver your knowledge. Just find the one that works for you. You don't have to get up on stage and in front of people to do that if that's the concern of being an introvert.